In the pre-dawn darkness of a tense Wednesday, the world stood witness to what many had feared for years, the unmistakable roar of Israeli warplanes over Tehran, their missiles striking deep into the heart of Iran's capital. The skyline flashed with explosions, emergency sirens wailed, and thousands of terrified residents rushed to the highways, desperate to escape what felt like the end of an era. As breaking news spread across continents, stock markets trembled and governments scrambled to convene emergency meetings. This was not just another regional flare-up. This was an event with the potential to redraw the lines of global power and to send shockwaves into every corner of our interconnected world. In a very real sense, what happens next could shape not just the Middle East, but the future of your economy, your security, and your everyday life. To truly understand how we arrived at this critical juncture and to appreciate the stakes, we must journey back through more than 4 decades of history, fraught with mistrust, missed opportunities, and moments where the world teetered on the edge. It all began in the late 1970s, a period that would forever alter the course of the Middle East. In the year 1979, the Iranian Revolution toppled the US-backed Shah, a monarch whose lavish lifestyle and authoritarian rule had alienated many Iranians. A coalition of religious leaders, students, and ordinary citizens installed an Islamic republic, led by Ayatollah Khomeini. The world was stunned when, soon after, militant students seized the American embassy in Tehran, taking over 50 diplomats hostage for 444 grueling days. The images of blindfolded Americans and angry crowds became seared into the collective memory, symbolizing a new era of confrontation. Diplomatic ties were severed, and a cycle of deep suspicion and animosity began, one that has shaped international affairs ever since. Throughout the 1980s, the relationship between Iran and the United States deteriorated further. The United States, seeking to counter the spread of Iranian influence, backed Saddam Hussein's Iraq during the devastating Iran-Iraq War. This was a brutal conflict that lasted for 8 years, claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, and left deep scars in both nations. American warships patrolled the Persian Gulf, and skirmishes between U.S. and Iranian naval forces became alarmingly frequent. The so-called tanker war threatened the world's oil supply, sending prices soaring and reminding leaders in Washington and Tehran that their actions could have global consequences. As the 1990s unfolded, American policy shifted to what became known as dual containment. Washington sought to limit the regional ambitions of both Iran and Iraq, employing sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military deterrence. But it was Iran's growing interest in nuclear technology that truly set off alarm bells. Western intelligence agencies warned that Iran was pursuing the capacity to enrich uranium and, potentially, to develop nuclear weapons. Sanctions multiplied, squeezing Iran's economy and fueling a sense of siege among its leaders. Meanwhile, Iran's support for militant groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza further inflamed tensions, as these proxies challenged both Israeli and American interests throughout the region. The early years of the 21st century brought new hope and new heartbreak. After years of secret diplomacy, marathon talks, and mounting international pressure, world powers and Iran hammered out the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, in the year 2015. The deal, painstakingly negotiated, offered Iran relief from crippling sanctions in exchange for strict limits and inspections on its nuclear program. For a moment, hope flickered. Perhaps, after decades of hostility, compromise was possible. European leaders hailed the agreement as a triumph of diplomacy, while international watchdogs confirmed Iran's compliance for several years. But just 3 years later, in 2018, President Donald Trump, arguing that the deal was too weak and did not address Iran's missile program or its support for proxies, unilaterally withdrew the United States from the JCPOA. Sanctions returned with full force, battering Iran's economy and emboldening hardliners in Tehran. The diplomatic bridge that had taken years to build was, in a matter of months, reduced to rubble. The gloves came off. Tensions soared to new heights in the year 2020, when a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's elite Quds force and a national hero to many Iranians. The world braced for all-out war as millions mourned and Iranian missiles struck American bases in Iraq. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei declared, "Those who know Iran's history know that Iranians do not answer well to the language of threat," underscoring a national ethos forged in resistance and sacrifice. Fast forward to the present, and the stakes have never been higher. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a leader known for his uncompromising stance, now openly claims that Israel's latest aerial assault could spell the end of the Iranian regime. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz proclaims that other targets in Iran will soon be bombed and destroyed, predicting the imminent collapse of what he calls the Iranian dictatorship. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Donald Trump issues chilling warnings. The United States knows exactly where Iran's supreme leader is hiding. Trump stops short of threatening assassination, but his message is crystal clear. Patience is evaporating, and the margin for error is vanishingly thin. We do not want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin, he declares on social media, signaling that the world's most powerful military is on alert. The human cost of this escalation is already staggering. In a single night of Israeli strikes, at least 224 people were killed in Iran, with more than 1,270 wounded, according to medical sources on the ground. Israeli officials boast that around 50 fighter jets struck nearly 20 targets, including missile factories, suspected nuclear facilities, and critical infrastructure. Satellite imagery confirms the devastation. A missile base near Tabriz lies in ruins, and the International Atomic Energy Agency reports that 2 centrifuge production sites have been hit. Tehran's airspace is sealed off, with all flights canceled until further notice, and the internet is teetering on the edge of a complete blackout. The streets of Tehran are emptying, as families pack what they can and set off into an uncertain future. Germany's chancellor calls Israel's campaign the dirty work for all of us, a grim acknowledgement that the stakes are not confined to a single border. Yet, beneath the smoldering ruins and the blaring headlines, the real danger lies in what comes next. The United States is now openly considering joining Israel in striking Iranian nuclear sites, a move that could trigger an uncontrollable chain reaction. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations warns that any direct American intervention will be met with a decisive response, promising consequences that will reverberate far beyond the region. Russian officials, too, sound the alarm, cautioning that U.S. involvement could radically destabilize the entire global order. As the world watches, Nobel laureates from Iran plead for peace and an immediate end to uranium enrichment. But Tehran's government doubles down, vowing never to surrender or negotiate under duress. The streets of Tehran, once teeming with life, are now haunted by uncertainty. The world is holding its breath. Will this latest round of violence spiral into a full-scale regional war? Or is there still the faintest chance for diplomacy before the fuse burns all the way down? As the globe teeters on the edge, the next decision by Washington could tip us all into uncharted and perilous territory. So, what are the possible roads ahead? Let's break down the scenarios and their profound implications. The first and most terrifying scenario is full-scale war. If that happens, the consequences will be catastrophic. Neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and even Turkey could be drawn in, while distant powers such as Russia and China might intervene diplomatically, economically, or even militarily. Experts warn that such a war would not just devastate Iran and Israel, but could trigger a global economic shock. The Middle East supplies roughly 1/3 of the world's oil. Any sustained conflict could send oil prices soaring to historic highs. Picture this: fuel prices at the pump doubling in weeks, heating bills in Berlin or London rising sharply, and shipping costs for everything from food to electronics skyrocketing. The International Energy Agency estimates that even a brief closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil choke point, would disrupt nearly 1/5 of global oil shipments. Already, insurance premiums for tankers in the region have surged, and shipping companies are rerouting their vessels to avoid danger zones. The humanitarian toll of such a war would be equally dire. Aid organizations warn that tens of thousands could be displaced within days, and millions might face hunger and disease if fighting spreads to major urban centers. Cities like Shiraz, Isfahan, and Mashhad, each with populations in the millions, could see their hospitals overwhelmed and basic infrastructure collapse. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is already bracing for a potential refugee crisis that could rival those seen during the worst years of the Syrian conflict. In addition, a wider war could destabilize fragile states in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, creating new safe havens for extremist groups and fueling cycles of violence that might last for generations. A second, somewhat less catastrophic scenario is a war of attrition, a relentless series of tit-for-tat strikes and cyber attacks. In this model, Israel and Iran would continue to target each other's military and economic infrastructure, while proxy groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or militias in Iraq and Syria would harass Israeli, American, or allied targets. Cyber sabotage could cripple banks, power grids, and communication networks across the region. RAND analysts note that this might prevent a wider war in the short term, but it is a perilous game. The risk of miscalculation is enormous. One errant missile, one misunderstood signal, could plunge the entire region into open conflict. Furthermore, this kind of low-level warfare would keep millions living in fear, create lasting economic instability, and make meaningful diplomacy nearly impossible. There remains, against considerable odds, a slender path to diplomacy. United Nations officials and Iranian Nobel laureates are calling for an immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations on the nuclear program. The International Atomic Energy Agency is urging all sides to allow inspections and maintain lines of communication. However, trust is at an all-time low. Both sides accuse the other of deception and bad faith. Iran's government adamantly rejects any talks under threat, insisting that negotiations must be carried out in good faith and without preconditions. The United States, for its part, demands concrete steps on uranium enrichment and missile programs before considering sanctions relief. History teaches us that prolonged standoffs like this often end in tragedy, or, more rarely, in breakthrough. Leaders must weigh not only the cost of action, but the price of continued escalation. It's worth recalling that during the Cold War, there were at least a dozen moments when the world came within minutes of nuclear conflict. In almost every case, it was not brute military strength, but a last-minute decision to talk, to pause, or to listen that saved humanity. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Able Archer war game in the early 1980s, and the false alarm of 1983, each was a moment when catastrophe beckoned, and yet dialogue prevailed. The Middle East today is perched on a similar knife's edge. The decisions of a handful of leaders, made in rooms far from the bombs and the suffering, could determine whether millions live or die. So, why does all this matter to you? In our globalized world, the myth of a regional conflict is just that, a myth. The Gulf region is a linchpin of global trade, energy, and finance. A missile strike in the Middle East can send ripple effects that reach your local gas station, your supermarket, or your internet connection. Investors worldwide are already jittery. Stock markets in New York, London, and Shanghai have all experienced wild swings as traders digest the latest headlines. A European energy analyst put it this way: one missile in the Gulf can raise heating bills in Berlin for months. Beyond the economic impacts, there's a deeper lesson about the cost of distrust and the fragile power of diplomacy. Decades of hostility, cycles of provocation and retaliation, and the failure to build lasting trust have brought us to the brink once again. For viewers, understanding these dynamics is not just an exercise in geopolitics. It's a way to recognize how decisions made half a world away can affect your family, your job, and your future. As we look ahead, the buildup of forces and the bellicose rhetoric on all sides make a new war look frighteningly plausible. Yet the fact that leaders are still issuing statements, however threatening, rather than unleashing their full military might, suggests that the door to negotiation, however narrow, remains open. Pressure from ordinary citizens, economic realities, and the demands of families fleeing violence all play a role in shaping what comes next. In Iran, thousands are now on the move, seeking safety, while in Israel, families huddle in bomb shelters, and in the United States, military bases across the region are on high alert. The fate of millions hangs in the balance. Let's not forget the role of technology in this crisis. Cyber warfare is a new and unpredictable front, with hackers targeting everything from power grids to hospital systems. The almost total internet blackout in Iran has not only hindered communication, but also restricted the flow of information, making it more difficult for independent observers to verify claims from either side. Meanwhile, satellite imagery, drones, and artificial intelligence are playing an unprecedented role in both warfare and monitoring. These tools offer both increased transparency and new dangers, as misinterpretations or technical glitches could escalate the conflict. So, what can ordinary people do in the face of such overwhelming forces? The answer, surprisingly, is not nothing. Public opinion, activism, and the choices of consumers and investors can all send signals to political leaders. When millions raise their voices, whether in protest, online campaigns, or by supporting humanitarian aid, leaders take notice. Economic realities, too, have a way of forcing even the most stubborn governments to the negotiating table. In the end, the fate of nations may depend as much on the will of their people as on the strategies of their generals. As the world stands at a crossroads, the choices made in the coming days and weeks will reverberate for decades. Will this crisis ignite a regional war, or can diplomacy snatch peace from the jaws of conflict? For now, the answer hangs between hope and fear, in a delicate balance as old as history itself. If you want to keep understanding how global crises shape your life, and how technology, diplomacy, and economics intertwine in the 21st century, make sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join this conversation. Because, as we have seen,